You've entered the gray area, the intersection of culture and technology. I'm your host, Angela Benton. Okay, so we're back after a mini hiatus. The last few weeks have been crazy, especially with the very tragic accident with Kobe, and we were set to actually record. We were on a good schedule with the gray area, and then that happened, and it was just like so tragic. And so now we're going to be back on a good schedule again. And so today I have
Alicia Stewart.
And how I know Alicia actually is from a long time ago. So I have to keep reminding myself that it's almost 10 years.
I know.
So I know Alicia from Black in America. She was a part of the crew for that. If you guys, I know there's a lot of new people that are either following me or familiar with my work, but almost 10 years ago, 2011, there was a huge documentary called Black in America with Soledad O'Brien, and this was when she was at CNN. And it literally was the catalyst for every single conversation around diversity in tech that is happening right now. And so that's how I know you.
Right.
Which is like, I can't believe it's like been so long. And so we reconnected. You guys know I'm in LA now, but we reconnected now that you're in LA. And so let us know what you've been up to.
Sure. So yeah, that back then, Jason Samuels really kind of like found the story of New Me and what you were doing.
Shout out to
out
Jason
in
too.
Bay Area. Hi, Jason. And so I wasn't as involved in the field work of doing that documentary, but doing a lot of the online and really seeing on social how that kind of blew up the conversation and really started a lot of the broader national conversation, in some cases global conversation around diversity and inclusion in Silicon Valley.
1,000% global.
And I mean, I remember specifically at the event, us being a trending topic, just from the clips. We hadn't even showed the whole documentary yet with Michael Arrington.
Yes, it was trending globally, but also I was shocked because I was getting emails from people in the Philippines, in Africa, in Asia. And so I was shocked at
the reach.
Yeah, the reach. It was crazy.
Yeah. So since then, I had the good fortune to work on some great projects within America and at CNN for some time, and went and did a fancy fellowship and went back to school and was really kind of like thinking about all the ways in which journalism and storytelling and what I uniquely did in that space could be more additive in a wider way. And so, came out really conscious of just this unique opportunity I'd had to be an entrepreneur in a lot of the big, media companies, from CNN to NBC to PBS, and had the opportunity to think about how, the disruption in storytelling really was the storytellers.
Yes.
And I kind of kept coming back to that from both in my experiences as well as in what I was studying when I was at Harvard and MIT on this Nieman fellowship, really looking at this kind of intersection of leadership, identity and spirituality, and looking at various models and what worked and what didn't, and thinking about the demographic changes that are coming to the U.S. specifically, but then more globally, really recognizing as I was traveling all around, that was already the reality, but the narratives were just changed, and the narratives were going to continue to be changing because the technology that allowed that disruptive. And so I saw those as kind of twin issues, but there was so much focus on the kind of like platform and tech part, but not, I felt like, as much focus on the actual storyteller part. And that's what I had always been interested, I think, working in journalism and documentaries for so long. And so that turned into, really doing a lot of speaking around that in a lot of social entrepreneurship and academic spaces, as well as coaching and consulting as it related to innovation within companies and the ways to do it inclusively and organically.
Right. And so one of the things that I want to talk about, actually, this is the topic of this podcast and this episode is really kind of linked to a lot of what you have been talking about for the past several years. And Nolan, Tyler, I don't know if you want to bring up the article I had sent over. So Clearview AI. Clearview AI. For you guys that are not familiar with Clearview, so they are a facial recognition company, and I would say probably over the past maybe 2 weeks, they've been getting a lot of press, a lot of headlines, primarily because what their AI does is they basically search and gather every single picture that you've ever posted on any platform ever. And it goes,
promises a 99% accuracy rate.
And he promises a 99. Yes, he has the audacity to promise a 99% accuracy rate. Although in an article I did see on Engadget, he did mention that, and he didn't say how accurate this piece was, but that it was not accurate for people of color, which that's what's been happening with facial recognition,
which is why there's the outcry, obviously.
Exactly. And so a lot of legislature have been reaching out to him. He's saying that they're doing everything completely legally. He and when I say he, let me reference his name. So this is the Wonton is the CEO, and there's a lot of video actually of him pretty much everywhere explaining the technology and actually demoing the technology. He is basically saying that it's completely legal for them to do, despite
and it is. As of now,
but despite Facebook sending him a cease and desist, despite Google sending him a cease and desist, he's gotten cease and desist from all of basically the major tech companies that are hosting all of you guys. YouTube has sent him a cease and desist, Facebook, Venmo. And then he actually, where's this piece of this article?
There was a New York Times investigation that talked about it being the kind of company that you haven't heard of but need to know about.
Yes, right? Because so basically he's selling all of this data to law enforcement.
Exactly.
And so it says the company has acquired its 3 billion image database. And that even if you feel like you don't have images that are of you online, you can be on some CC, like
somebody post.
It doesn't even have to be you. It could be a friend, a sister, whomever. There are images of you online that are basically in this system without anyone knowing. And so that is the big hoopla about all of this. And obviously there's a lot of implications for this.
Huge.
Like for just how we live our everyday lives. It violates our privacy in a lot of respects. He says that it's legal under the First Amendment. And so it's like, is it really legal or is it not? And then also, especially for people of color, like, first of all, we're already targeted more, and now we have a database
that's inaccurate
for
people of color specifically,
right?
Because of the way it's trained.
Exactly.
Artificial intelligence is trained, right?
Yeah. So off top, it's inaccurate, and it's also in the possession of people, law enforcement, who can basically search. There were some instances where law enforcement were like searching ex-girlfriends and people that they want to date. And so,
you mean like for personal use?
For personal use, yeah. So it's really, really tricky and scary, but something that we all need to be aware about. And Alicia, you had a great point when we were talking about this earlier.
Thoughts.
Yes. yes. So you had a great point, but I would love for you to talk about the point that you were saying earlier.
So, I mean, I think when I had been kind of reading about the story, there were immediately like 3 thoughts that come to mind. One is, it's not new in the sense that there's always been tools to track us.
Yeah.
What is new is the kind of brazen way he's using it to like make a lot of money, and then it not being completely accurate for the people who are most maligned and marginalized as a result of who's using it, right?
Yes.
And so And in thinking about that context, the second point I really was thinking about is, I worked on a documentary called African American Lives many moons ago. And at the time, I was working on a period of time that was when photography was fairly new. So daguerreotypes were the first kind of publicly available ways in which those images were taken. And at that time, there was, and you can still see this on Harvard's website in their Peabody archives, there were these rare portraits of Africans who had become enslaved in the U.S. that was done by a biologist to basically prove the inhumanity of Black people. Right? Africans who had come to basically, justify that. And this is stated, this is documented. This is not like someone guessing at his intentions.
Right.
And so, we have this long history in America and obviously writ large within the global population of this visual literacy that has been used to both be used, right, to tell a story about people that is not always accurate and it's not always done by them, right? And so I feel like this is the kind of modern day extension of that.
Yeah.
And the other thing you have to think about, I couldn't help but think about in that same context, right? You had this biology trying to use images to show the inhumanity of of Black people in America, right, of Africans in America. And then you fast forward to the, in that same century, you had the most photographed man of that time being Frederick Douglass, also a former slave, who used that to his advantage. Now, I mean, to hear that, it's one thing to hear the most photographed man in the 19th century. Now, think about that. That's more than Abraham Lincoln.
Right.
Who everybody knows, right?
Yes.
And so he was very conscious of using, and there was a book, just a few years ago that came out speaking very specifically about how he used his image and was conscious of what that told him, told people, the public, about him, himself, and Black people writ large. And then, you can forward to the next century to see how the civil rights movement used the medium, right, became the message, right, in terms of the activism. So we have this longer history of a visual narrative, of a visual literacy that has been used in both ways. And so I feel like this is an extension of that. And the reason why people are so upset, understandably, now is because even if it is a tool, which is, the kind of counterpoint of various enforcement agencies, the way that, a arm of the state is used to kind of like specifically target citizens that have the same freedoms that are guaranteed in our Constitution, all right, in our Bill of Rights. I think as an American, I think that's definitely something we should be concerned about and should be asking questions about and investigating. And like I said, there's been some great journalism. I've already mentioned the New York Times. You've mentioned a few that have looked deeper into that. And it's only going to be increasingly important that we kind of think about what those implications are. Here's another kind of quick and last and final point that I thought about. When my background is within the kind of journalism, documentary, storytelling spaces. And so when we were trained, as a young pup, way back in the day, the thing I was always conscious of is like, nobody knows what it's like to like be on TV until they're on TV and like know that the impact of having people recognize you, even if you're not necessarily famous.
Right.
And so there was like a heightened responsibility, whether specifically with a visual medium like television, which I've primarily worked in, or when you were writing about someone, right? If they were in the blotter, the criminal blotter of what that would do. Yeah. So there's always been, public information that we've had access to specifically, as journalists. But I think that there's a training and a responsibility of what to do with that. And so I think the concern with a company that is obviously benefiting and making good money off of that, and says they're taking that, says they're taking those responsibilities, obviously their kind of number one priority is to keep the business in business. Right. So I think that's why this is kind of blown up, and there's been a lot of conversation and interest in this particular company, which becomes symbolic of others because, as we've discussed, there have been CEOs that have had similar technology and have not sold it to law enforcement. And so, whether or not you agree with that, people have made different choices. And I think it's also kind of symbolic of people's concern about their private information being public for people, mostly, benefiting businesses who don't have their best interest in mind. Right. Not because they're not concerned about them, but they're more concerned about their bottom line.
Yeah. And the idea that there should be a level of responsibility, it's lost on me that is not, that's just not an innate thing to do.
Why is that lost on you? You've been in entrepreneurship for a while.
I know. It's just, I know that he and probably, his financial backers, they understand the implications of what impact that this can have. Like, obviously they're in it to make money, but like also at some point it's like there should just, I just feel like as a human there should be like a level of responsibility. And so part of what was going into this article was, it was actually talking about the images of, it's very sticky because the images of minors. Like, I don't tag my kids in anything anymore because I noticed weirdos on social media started following my children.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so I don't tag them on anything. I actually removed, I have like one picture of them on my page. I'll mainly post to stories, but what's funny is if you post it once, it's in this database
Even
already.
if you were public initially and then moved to a private, it's out there. And so that's just weird that like no one is like, okay, even when it comes to children, right? Like, we need to be more responsible about who has access to this tool, or how deep we're going in terms of scraping all of this stuff. Like, all of this is driven by machine learning, so there should be some kind of way to identify the age basically of the people that are in the database, and removing people who skew towards under 18 basically. But that's not being done. So I know there's things that can be done technically that they're just choosing not to do. And even one of the backers in the Engadget article, one of the backers says that unsurprisingly, Clearview's financial backers remain unconcerned about the system's potential for abuse. I've come to the conclusion that because information constantly increases, there's never going to be privacy, David Scalzo, founder of Kierninga Partners and an early Clearview investor, told the New York Times. Then he says, laws have to determine what's legal, but you can't ban technology. Sure, that might lead to a dystopian future or something, but you can't ban it. Tell me what's alarming you. I'm sure you've heard this before from some tech pros. Come on.
Well, this is a part of like what I guess makes me so interested about technology and the implication on like society is because our laws are not set up to regulate in any way, shape, or form. From a privacy perspective, from any perspective. And so even when you look at in terms of who's running, for office, it's like, say what you may about AOC. I know she's very polarizing, but she understands technology and she understands the implications that it has. She's the one who's been bringing up the issue around facial recognition. No one else has. And so there is also a need for lawmakers to be like have a very deep understanding of like what the next 30 plus years are going to look like with technology. And that's just like,
well, and nobody can predict that, even the folks who are expert in it, right? Like, Mark and Facebook couldn't have predicted, like, the pushback now it was definitely brought up. We can see that like in the oral history, et cetera, some of those concerns, but it's happening in real time, right? And the forces of change sometimes like are moving faster than the pushback against them when people are like, wait, hold up. Don't want my whole family like, searchable and findable everywhere, because even though we're kind of in this age of everyone's a celebrity, everybody doesn't want to be, and they should have the right to not be.
Yes. And I've even become increasingly more private on social media, and a lot of it is because, and like this is also fascinating that like I'm lucky enough to even have this conversation with you, because like you just said, in the age where just about everybody is a celebrity, we're documenting basically the story of our lives.
Exactly.
From a storytelling perspective, we have no control really over
we do, but we're also offering it for the most part, right?
Yeah.
And so, but again, you know, there's the responsibility of the implication. You don't always know that when you start. It's just a fun thing to do, right?
Right.
You know, you can think about when Facebook or Path or whatever, take your pick of social network that you were excited about when you were just kind of putting up your food or whatever you were interested in at the time. And then, you know, maybe you got bored or maybe you got woke or whatever it is. You know, you slowed down on that. Like, I mean, I don't have a face on Facebook. You know, I'm very like, you know, I'm out there, but I'm not.
Yes.
Yes. But I think that, you know, you bring up some points, which is what the constant conversation is, which is what, you know, technologists, everyday people, legislators, citizens who are concerned, right, are having the conversation of is like, are we getting to a point, and is this only going to lead to a point, which, you know, many people much smarter than me have already, you know, talked about ad nauseum, of privacy then being only for those who can afford it, right? Because essentially that is how FANG, you know, Facebook, Amazon, et cetera, all of these companies that are really making this money off our data, which, you know, it could be argued, right? This is always what's been. It's just in a new platform. It's just in a new way. But when we don't, then Google might know more about me than I know about me, right? In the sense of like what they can amass from all of those free services. But I think that that's the part of the conversation. And if you look at the history of the new technologies, I mean, there's definitely a thread of it's always been stopped by like the pushback of people when it got like really scary, right? So it's never been by the businesses that started it, because obviously their motivation is going to be different from those who are concerned about those things that we're talking about.
And so
doesn't mean they don't care, but they care maybe more about their bottom line, for sure, understandably.
And for folks that are listening, so the acronym FANG is often used in technology. It stands for Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google. Right. Just so that you know. So basically all the top tech companies. So when you hear somebody say FANG, that's what that means. And okay, so so yes, it's never corrected. It's never self-corrected, really, by the companies.
I should say rarely. I don't know if I can say never.
Yeah,
but
rare.
It's rarely. Right.
But even when you have folks like, I think I was watching something on YouTube last night, or maybe that was earlier today. Anyway, Elon Musk does not have a Facebook. He's like, no, it's stupid. And then when someone kind of tried to check him on Twitter about it, they were like, well, SpaceX and Tesla have Facebook accounts. And he's like, I wasn't aware of that, and basically deleted the account. And so I'm definitely an Elon stan, number one. So
just so we're clear.
Okay. So I'm definitely an Elon stan. But so, you know, a lot of what he says about, even though they are a part of kind of the AI movement with Tesla and everything. Tesla's it's a computer, it's a car that's a computer. But he's very, I guess, woke, aware, and mindful about the implications of AI. And then also for him to say that, like, he doesn't have a Facebook, or then even being in Silicon Valley, like a lot of the top tech executives or founders, they are not actually heavily entrenched in social media and a lot of these services like everyday people are. And it also kind of makes you think, like, it's like, okay, do they know? Is it really like a time thing? Like, do you just don't want to invest your time, or do you really know, like, what the true implications might be? You know?
What do you think are the smart questions people should be asking about their social media usage? Because, I mean, obviously, as artificial intelligence, you know, gets smarter, and there are kind of unknown consequences that come from that, and just the data, you know, you're obviously in the data business that share. What are the questions that people should be asking to be, you know, more kind of aware of that?
Well, first of all, I personally feel like everybody should get their data.
Right.
Number one, the problem is a lot of these companies make it extremely hard to do that. Now, by law, they're providing you with your data now. But even then, like, it took me 23 days to get my Amazon data.
And then what did you do with it?
Nothing.
Okay.
Well, actually,
So you don't convert it to a file and analyze it? Or?
Dang, I want to say what we're working on, but I can't. But you're getting there. We'll talk about it offline.
Okay.
But yes, but no, I don't do anything with it now.
Okay, personally for yourself. Okay.
No, because really the whole thing, and that's also kind of why I wanted to start the gray area. Just there's not enough space in my Instagram comments to really talk about data and really the kind of whole ecosystem that I feel that is going to develop around it. But right now, there's nothing really that you can do with it. In the EU, they obviously have places where you can sell your data and stuff. I imagine that is going to
Streamalytics in the US.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll have stuff that people can upload their data to. But what's fascinating about this is even once you get your data files, it's still not transferable to be useful.
Well, see, what's interesting to me about when we talk about data and big data, and obviously it means different things to different people and depending on the context, but what's interesting to me kind of connected with this idea of every tech entrepreneur theoretically wants to change the world is I feel like, what if we change the conversation from the big data of how we can sell more to the data of our own personal decisions and how we can change ourselves and be accountable to our values, right? And how we can think more smartly and and maybe that's too she frou or woo woo for folks, because I think that there's a spiritual and healing element, particularly when you talk about communities that have been marginalized. And you think about those implications of all of the things that are being created actually impact those who, I know specifically with the Black community are often, the earliest adapters and proportionally to their size and, some of the highest users. I mean, I think that there's an opportunity when you maybe get that personal data to see what do you learn about yourself beyond it just being a play of what you can sell.
Well, yes.
To how does this what have I learned and and how I'm contributing to the world. I think that that's a very different orientation than just what are we using this for and how we can sell it.
Can we make money for it? Yeah.
Right. And I mean, I think that that's the conscious part of the capitalism, which is, the place we live in. And, that is just seeped in what we're all in.
Sure.
But it's interesting. I think that there is, to your point, you get the data and then what? Right.
Right.
And so that's part of the frustration, I think, for those who are really kind of becoming aware of how much they've shared and they can't really get it back or undo it or just push the delete button.
Right.
Because there's a process and it's hard.
Yeah.
Right? It's not made easy, as you mentioned, is just kind of being more conscientious about how can that be useful in learning about ourselves and our place in the world and how it can be additive.
Yeah. It's funny. So I was thinking, I don't know, I just be thinking about crazy stuff on my hike, and you'll notice that when we go on our hike. But one day I was on a hike and I was like, wow, everything is really a data point. When I'm walking from point A to point B, my brain is registering that as a data point. And then after I had that thought later, I was working and I was looking at some data sets. They were my own data sets, and I had pulled all my data from Google, and I was looking at my location data that Google had on me, and the level of information that they have, obviously the longitude and latitude, but they know if you are tilting. Some of this stuff is obvious because
that's interesting.
Because of what's in your
GPS.
phone, whether it's a gyroscope or accelerometer. They know if you're accelerating or turning or whatever. But they had if you were driving, if you were on a bicycle, if you were on a four-wheeler, if you were on a two-wheeler. And so the detail that's in there is, I also think, if you're not downloading your data and actually looking at it, you're they have my data or whatever, but it's really to a very fine detail.
Sure.
And what is happening to me, it's like, just like our brains are registering when I'm on a hike, I'm going from point A to point B. That is also what our phones are doing. It's also what all these data files that we're generating are doing. And like, yeah, maybe some people want to delete it. Maybe some people might want to sell it. But however you decide that you want to use it, it's powerful information. And even to take it, you know, a step further, you mentioned something about I forget the point that you made, but it made me think about DNA and how when you go through trauma, it literally affects your DNA.
It's stored in the in the body.
Exactly. So, you know, even when you're thinking about data, or I gave my genetic data to 23andMe. That's a whole other thing. So when you just think about the scope,
we're going to make a new pill from that.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Well, I mean, okay, so that's a perfect example, right? Yeah. So with the DNA, so I was telling you about the documentary I worked on, African American Lives, and one of the things I was struck by in that technology and the database base of what's available and how you find it is much larger than it was then. We were kind of the first to do it in America. This TV show, there had been a similar one in Europe and Canada, I believe. But what was interesting to me about working with, you know, both the scientists on the DNA side and, you know, the companies that were doing the samples for us with basically, let me just give you a quick premise of the show. It was working with like celebrities, you know, from Oprah to, you know, Henry Louis Gates, who was the host, to Chris Tucker, et cetera. Okay, right. Yeah. So, you know, basically these people, you know, and looking at genealogy and specifically as it relates to Black people, those who come from an enslaved ancestry can only go so far. So DNA was this bridge, right, to find out where you were really from, quote unquote. And so what was always fascinating to me about genealogy is that you could live in the past and still not, and about DNA is that you were only as good as your sample. Right. And so you can say that so-and-so is from the Ivory Coast, but if your sample doesn't have like the samples of everybody, I always was like, how accurate can this really be? And I think, you know, you can make that same, you know, kind of point with data. So yes, it is powerful. And yes, it can feel very intrusive, but it is parts of a whole. Yeah. And I think, you know, for me, you know, it doesn't mean that there shouldn't be concerns. It doesn't mean there shouldn't be these conversations or questions.
Well, you just need to be aware.
But I think you have to be aware, but you also have to kind of put it in the context of the larger picture. And I think what concerned maybe you when you first saw this story and this article about the company, about Clearview AI, is we don't want to not have enough information before we're condemning people, right? We're only seeing a small part of the picture with some of our data or some of our DNA, right? And so I think that like for me, it always helps to kind of add context and, you know, history, and like a larger picture, just really kind of get to the nitty gritty of like, what is it we're concerned about and how can we like deal with this in, you know, a level-headed way with compassion and also with, you know, just some kind of scope of how to think about this in ways to actually move the conversation forward or deal with it as it needs to be dealt with accurately.
I was actually talking to one of my engineers about this because we were looking at a lot of what they're doing with DNA data sets, and what came up is there's actually a unified format for DNA. So when you download your DNA file, you can upload it to someplace else, but you can get completely different results, which is like, you know, so
the same with data.
Yeah,
like
the same
Google
with
versus Netflix versus
exactly. So to your point around,
and there's no standardization yet. Right. Yes. Right.
So. Okay, where are we at on time?
34 minutes.
Okay. All right. So, I'm pulling one other thing up from this article just to close this all out, in respect to the Clearview conversation, but hopefully you guys, this was so good. Alicia.
I'm so glad.
And you talk fast
This
like
is,
me,
you
and
know
this was
why?
like good.
It was the first woman on the show. That's why.
Yes, yes, yes.
Not the last.
Not the last. And so, yes, only the third episode. I was like, oh, I gotta get some women on here, and so this was fantastic.
Great.
So you guys can keep up with what is going on with Clearview. Actually, Senator Edward Markey actually sent a note to Clearview based on, you know, some of their actions. He had a list of 14 questions for the CEO of Clearview that needed to be addressed by Wednesday, February 12th, which is today.
Okay.
So that should be interesting. So you guys can stay tuned to that. What else? We'll have another episode on the gray area. I want to talk about the DNA stuff.
Yes.
I'm gonna do a whole episode on that.
That's gonna be interesting.
But Alicia, tell people if you. I know you're
Sure.
not on social media like that, but
yes,
tell people where they
I
can
tell
follow
you,
you.
if you want to reach me on social media, please reference this podcast and reach out to me on LinkedIn. But if you want to stay connected, I do have a newsletter where I'll talk directly to you. It's been revamped to be called Marginalized Genius on MailChimp, and you can sign up.
I love it.
And hear more about my thoughts on the disruption of storytelling, being a storyteller.
Yes, and send me the link. I will include the link for Marginalized Genius.
Okay, great.
In the show notes, so you guys can easily subscribe to that, which if you want to see and hear, I guess, more musings, this was a brilliant conversation. Thank you so much.
You're too kind.
Subscribe, and that's it for this episode of The Gray Area.
Thank you, Andrea.